Wow, what a nice day. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I want to get this first talk started with a little game. So what I would ask you to do is to please put down whatever you have in your hands, your phones, tablets, coffees, put them down, and please stand up for a moment. Don't worry, nobody's going to get hurt. So this game is based on a true story. And in order to solve the game, it's a kind of a quiz, I need you guys to pair up. So can you please turn to your left or to your right, find a partner, and pair up. Okay, so everybody got a partner? Wonderful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the beginning and the end of a story. And then I want you guys to discuss what happened in between, okay? And what I'm going to do is to give you 3 clues, not right away, but over time. So if you think you know the answer and you have heard all 3 clues, feel free to sit down. Again, if you heard all 3 clues and you know the answer, you think you know the answer, please sit down, okay? And if I still see people standing, we will resolve it together. Okay, so here's what happened. This is a true story. At Google, our YouTube team, they released an app for iPhone, for iOS, to record videos. And so that's the beginning of the story. The result of the story is that 5 to 10% of all the videos uploaded were upside down. So 5 to 10% of the videos uploaded were upside down. So feel free to discuss what could have happened. Why were the videos upside down? Please. Okay, first clue. It was not a software mistake. It was nothing related to the code, nothing technical, nothing related to the software. Second clue. It was a design mistake. It was a mistake of design, okay? Okay, third clue. We're getting there. Third clue is it was absolutely related to the person. It was a design mistake, and it was with regards to the person holding the phone. Okay, I see some people sitting down, but maybe we can all resolve it together, okay? Can I ask everyone to still stand up, still be standing, take your phones, okay? Take your phones and go into recording mode. Let me do that as well. So everyone, please go into recording mode and hold it up with one hand, okay? Everyone, hold up your phones, recording mode. Great. Now I ask everyone who's holding his phone with the right hand to please sit down. Everyone who's holding it with the right hand, please sit down. Okay? So basically, anyone who's standing right now, you're the reason why the 5 to 10% of the videos were uploaded upside down. So please give yourself a round of applause. So what happened here is that our almost exclusively right-handed developer team was building a product for right-handed people. And what this phenomenon is called unconscious bias. These are biases that dictate our day-to-day behavior, that influence our day-to-day behavior. And these are biases these are attitudes, if you want, or beliefs that they're not wrong, but they're not complete, right? So building a product for right-handed people is not wrong, but it's not complete because you didn't consider left-handed people. And what I noticed traveling the world and working in different cultures is that I, too, have a lot of beliefs that are not wrong, but they're very limited. And today I want to talk a little bit about the beliefs that I had to redefine and change when I moved to Silicon Valley, working for a tech company, working for Google as a Silicon Valley company in Silicon Valley. So today's talk is really about thinking a little bit differently about innovation, leadership, creating great company cultures, and competition, okay? And in order to get started, maybe I should tell you who I am and what my story is. So my name is Omid Scheybani, and I'm a world culture storyteller. As a world culture storyteller, I travel the world, I interact with people from many different cultures, I learn from them, and then I share what I learn, my personal and cultural insights, through speaking, writing, and visual storytelling. For example, on the first night here in Lithuania, I knew that Lithuanian is the oldest language, but what I also learned is that there are similarities between Lithuanian and Sanskrit in Indian, the Indian Sanskrit. The word Dana, song, from what I understood, exists in both languages, for example. So these are some of the things, just a very simple example, but some of the things that I like to learn and share with people. And this is not how it started. It all started in a small town close to Nuremberg in Germany. That's where I was born and raised. But as you can probably tell by my features, my parents are originally from Iran. As a matter of fact, they're sitting here in the audience. So thank you, parents, for coming. Thank you. And they really made a big effort to allow me to have a strong connection to Iran. And as a matter of fact, this past summer, I was able to take 3 of my German friends with me to Iran, and we traveled the country and had an amazing time getting to know Iran better. And when I came back from this trip, I had so many great stories and pictures that I didn't want to keep them to myself. So I started to do a photo exhibition in San Francisco, which was a full-month photo exhibition in which I was exhibiting some of the pictures that I took on my trip. And what made this exhibition so special was the fact that all pictures of that exhibition were taken and edited on a smartphone. So it was the first ever smartphone photo exhibition about Iran. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because this story will be relevant later on in my talk. So let me go back. I finished high school. I ended up studying a business degree in a small university close to Frankfurt. And I also went to Argentina to study some time there. I got to learn Spanish. And when I graduated my undergrad degree, with my bachelor degree, I was very fortunate to land a job with Google in Dublin, in Ireland, where I started out in a very small team of 3 people that we grew to 50 people within 18 months. So it was a sales team that we started and that became fairly big after 18 months. That's a picture of the team. That's me on my last day. The day after, I went to New York to spend the summer there for Google as well. And then in 2011, I then transferred to our global headquarters in Mountain View in Silicon Valley, working specifically on distribution partnerships. So think of Google's B2B products. Think specifically of Google Apps for Work, which is our email solution for businesses. My work in the last 4 years has been consisting of getting these products to the Latin American market through partnerships, distribution partnerships. So with that in mind, something that has been always very important to me is to not be defined by my 9 to 5. So when people ask me, Omid, where do you work? I don't say I work at Google. I say I work from Google, which means that I'm very fortunate to be in an environment that is full of cutting-edge technology, autonomy, and progressive thinking. And it would really be crazy not to use all of these resources to somehow benefit others. So that's what I've been doing through blogging and different projects that I've been pursuing. So if you go to my website, you can see a compilation of different projects that I'm doing that have 3 purposes: helping understand what makes people happier, helping understand what makes employees more successful, and understanding how companies can create more value for their customers. And that's basically what I want to talk about today. So let me start, again, by the way, I'm going to tell you personal stories. This is not a business talk, so let me start with a personal story. The story of myself and my manager, John. And believe me, this is the only picture I found, the party picture. Actually, there was one more picture, but on that picture, we were growing mustaches for for charity, and I felt it wouldn't be appropriate to show you a picture with a mustache. So, freshly shaved. So John was my first manager at Google. And before I joined Google, I had experience working in German work environments. And I say German because there were some characteristics that I would say were typical German. And I know it's very dangerous to generalize, but I would describe those work environments to be hierarchical, structured, and traditional. So that was the mindset. These were the beliefs that I had when I entered Google. And on the first day of my job, John asked me into his office, and he said, Omid, I want to have a one-on-one conversation with you, a face-to-face conversation. I want to understand what you're envisioning for yourself working in this team. So my attitude was, okay, he wants to see, he probably wants to hear that I'm going to stay around forever and I'm really committed to the cause and what have you. So that's what I talked about. I said, yeah, hopefully one day in future I want to be a manager of this team, work myself up. I wanted to make him believe that I would be around forever. And then he looked at me and he said, Omid, actually, I want you to be so good in 18 months that you get 3 job offers from other teams, inside and outside of Google. I want you to kick ass so much and so well that other teams come and want you. Wow. Really? So I was really surprised. Why would he say that? Of course he wanted me to perform, but why would he want to see me leave? It didn't make sense to me. So I asked him, please help me understand. It doesn't make sense with the kind of beliefs that I have. And he told me, look, Omid, it's my job to make you shine, to make you perform, so that other teams want you, okay? But it's also my job to understand you and understand your goals and your personal objectives and give you an environment that allows you to meet those objectives that you don't want to leave. So if you leave because someone else makes you a better job offering, it's actually my fault because I didn't understand what is important to you and I didn't give you what is important to you. So what this, by the way, completely contradictory to what I thought leadership would be. But it turned out that it was a very empathy-driven leadership style. He really cared about me as a person more than he cared about me as an employee. And that was very important because he understood that any employee coming into his team, it wasn't just about finding a job that helps pay the bills. It really was about finding a job that would help find fulfillment and help the employee realize himself. And he, for example, really understood that. What he also understood was that if he helps me meet my personal objectives, my personal goals, my professional goals as well, that he could get the best performance out of me. So his focus was not on how can I get Omid to stay, but his focus was, can I understand Omid and his personal objectives so I can accommodate them in my team and help him stay the longest and contribute the most? And that was really a change of mindset that I never knew and never had seen. So something interesting happened. Noticing that my manager really cared about me changed my perspective as well. I trusted him so much. I trusted him so much that I would even say things like, John, I don't know what's best for me. Maybe you know, So there were times when he offered me to move to a project and work on something else, and initially I thought it wouldn't be the right thing, but then he said, no, believe me, it is. And instead of questioning it, I accepted it because I knew he really cared about me and he really wanted the best for me. And that was a very interesting relationship to have with a manager where my attitude was, he cares about me and I really need to do my very best to impress him day after day after day after day. So that was very interesting. And it really brings me to a point which is this contradictory way of thinking that managers really want you to stay or managers are really afraid to see you leave. And what happens is, working on the Latin American market for the last 4 years, I've been working with a lot of different companies, talking to them face to face, small IT companies, distribution partners. And they would tell me, look, my employees are great, but if I invest in them, if I promote them, if I let them go get certifications, et cetera, if I give them too much of these things, they will leave. And they will have a better position to go negotiate other offers and leave. And I thought that was really bad. And every time I heard that, I showed them a quote that really, really impacted me when I read it the first time. So let me show you that. The CFO asked the CEO, what happens if we invest in developing our people and then they leave us? And the CEO says, what happens if we don't and they stay? Very powerful, right? So, thank you. Yeah, it's very, very powerful. And I showed it to them. I said, you need to invest in your people. Your employees will leave one day anyway. So why not help them feel comfortable, realize their personal objectives in your team? Again, they don't come just to pay their bills. They come to learn, they have certain goals in their life. Help them achieve those goals, not just the professional goals of selling more and entering new markets and what have you, but help them achieve those personal goals. And then they contribute more and they probably stay longer. That's a different way of treating your employees. By the way, this really brings me to a point, which is if you're afraid of your employees leaving, you shouldn't stop them from doing that. You should find the cause. You should really solve the problem. And the best and saddest story that I can think of that really incorporates that is the company Foxconn. It's a Taiwanese company. Does anyone know Foxconn? Okay, they're basically the hardware manufacturer behind most of the iPhones, for example. So they deliver hardware to Apple. And they have over 1 million employees, 1,200,000. And they had last year they were in the news because a lot of their employees were committing suicide because of the really bad working conditions. And if you have a problem like that, you should not cover the problem, but solve the problem. So you know what they did? They put nets outside the windows of where the employees were living. But maybe people didn't commit suicide that way, but it didn't solve the problem, right? So you really need to solve the problem. And in this case, it's really understanding what an employee wants in your company and then helping them achieve those goals. Another great example that brings me to the idea of leaving or not leaving is the company Zappos. Zappos is a retailer based out of Las Vegas. They were bought by Amazon. They started out with retailing shoes, very successful company. And what made them different was that they were probably among the first companies to really revolutionize customer service and have amazing customer service. And here's what they did. Any employee that they hired, they let them go through a 4-week program to learn the strategy, the culture, and the processes. 4 weeks, right? And then they let them work for a week. And then they made something that they call the offer. They made them the offer. They said, listen, we pay you for those 5 weeks, and we give you $3,000 if you leave. So some people would take the money, the $3,000 and their salary for the last 5 weeks, and they would leave, and others would stay. And that is a fantastic way to really make sure that the employees you hire are really passionate about the job, understand your company's values and mission, and really want to be part of that, as opposed to having people that you hire that are just there for the money, and then they don't contribute everything that they, with all the energy that they have, right? A very, very beautiful example. So that brings me to the next point. So that was about leadership. Now I would like to talk a little bit about innovation and disruption. And in order to get started about that, let me just say, in Silicon Valley, I get to talk to a lot of different companies, and there's a lot of companies bringing innovation to the market. So over time, I've been thinking a lot about when is an innovation actually disruptive? Because there's so many innovations, but not every innovation that is brought to market is disruptive. So I thought about it, and to tell you the lessons that I learned, I would like to share with you this story. So this guy on the left, his name is Zach. Zach is 86 years old, and he's the owner of the art gallery where I did my photo exhibition about Iran. And one day I was coming to the art gallery. It was before my photo exhibition started. I got there and I was 10 minutes late. And he was closing the door already. And he said, Omid, don't waste my time. You're 10 minutes late. We're not gonna talk today. Come next time. And I said, Zach, please wait. And while I was trying to convince him to stay and talk to me, I noticed that he was having something in his hand, which was, as you can see here, a Nest thermostat. Who's familiar here with the Nest thermostat? Okay, a few people. So this Nest thermostat is important. Like, I'm telling you this because it taught me two very important lessons around leadership. The first one is, so let me talk about the Nest thermostat first. It's a thermostat that was brought to market in 2011, and it wasn't much different than any other thermostat. It allowed you to regulate heating, the AC, and it had some user-defined settings. But what made this thermostat really different was that it was easy to use. I don't know about you guys, but every time I go to a hotel room and I see the AC is on, I panic a little because I don't know how to deal with those thermostats, and I'm always afraid to get a cold until the next morning. So thermostats have always, in my mind at least, have always been like this painful thing to use, and they really understood that. And they came, and they, by the way, Matt Rogers and I forgot the other guy's name, Tony Fadell. And Tony Fadell was also a guy he was behind the iPod, so he knew one or two things about creating beautiful hardware experiences. And what they did was they understood the experience is really bad, so let's recreate the experience, okay? And so they entered the market in 2011, became very successful. People really started buying thermostats. It was like the newest thing. You know, it wasn't a sexy business to be in, but they made it really sexy. This is, by the way, how it looks like. Actually, very sexy if you think about a thermostat. And what happened was Honeywell, the company that was actually in power, like dominating the market of thermostats, they started in 2012, so just 1 year after, they started suing Nest, and that didn't go well. And then they started bringing out their own product in 2014, their competing product. And this is, by the way, what all big companies do. First, they try to sue you. Then they try to copy you. Then they try to acquire you. And if that all doesn't go well, they end up having a venture capital arm in their business as well, because they're a big company, and so they need to have like a venture capital division to go out there and do partnerships and joint ventures with smaller companies. But it turned out actually that Google acquired this company, and now Nest is part of Google. But what is really interesting here, and this is a philosophy that has been coined by a guy called Todd Olson. And what he says, it's very, very interesting. He says it's not technical innovation that makes a product disruptive. It is design innovation that makes a product disruptive. So let me explain what that means. So technical innovation, think of technical innovation as using engineering resources to come up with a better process or a better product. That's technical innovation. And think of design innovation as design thinking, using existing technologies and design thinking to create a better user experience. And what he argues, and I very much agree with that, it's not a new technology coming to the market that makes the existing technology disrupted, that disrupts the existing technology. It's the design. And I think a few very good examples are, for example, the combustion engine. So Carl Benz, in 1879, he created the combustion engine. He patented it. And a few years later, in 1885, he started creating cars. Okay? But the cars that he created, based on the combustion engine, on that technology, they didn't disrupt the horse and carriage industry. Neither did the assembly line by Ransom Olds at the end of the 19th century, or beginning of the 20th century. It was a new technology, but that also didn't disrupt the horse and carriage industry. What really disrupted the horse and carriage industry was Henry Ford's Model T. And what Henry Ford did was he was using existing technologies, the assembly line and the combustion engine, to create a beautiful product. So he used the technologies to meet his design objectives. So the Ford Model T wasn't necessarily a marvel of technology, it was a marvel of design, because people could afford it and it looked great and it had better features than a horse and a carriage. Okay? Another example, animated movies. If you think of animated movies, they were patented in 1914, but they didn't disrupt the movie industry. It was Walt Disney who took this technology in 1937, about a quarter of a century later, and created the movie of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And that was the first movie based on animated movie technology that became groundbreaking and became a disruptive force in the movie industry. As a matter of fact, it was the highest grossing movie with $8 million of revenue as a sound movie. So it's really important to understand that it's design innovation, not always technological innovation, that leads to disruption. The second thing I learned about disruption is that your innovation will be so much more disruptive if the target market that you go after, that you address, the more inefficient it is. So think of inefficiency as an open invitation for disruption. Okay? I think the simplest example I could think of is Uber. And I think you guys have heard a lot of Uber examples over the last day. But think of Uber as a company that entered a market that was highly inefficient. If you take the taxi industry, drivers have to get medallions for up to $1 million. They drive cars that they don't even own, so they don't care necessarily about the cars. And you as a passenger, availability of cars has always been such an issue. And so the taxi industry, if you looked at it, even before Uber came to stage, it was just not very efficient. And the reason why Uber ended up being so disruptive, one of the many reasons, was simply because the target market was so highly inefficient. Next example is actually a company that I'm on the board of. It's called PopTalk. It's a startup out of Silicon Valley that is targeting the telecommunications sector in the Latin American market. And it's very interesting if you listen to the following. There are 2.2 phone subscriptions per person in Latin America. People walk around with more than just one phone, with multiple phones, because so they have one phone with that operator, then they have another phone with another operator, because calling from one operator to the same is cheaper than calling one operator to a different operator. And also, it's more expensive to call between states, so they have phones from different states, et cetera, et cetera. It's absolutely crazy. It's highly inefficient. And again, it's an open invitation to come in and disrupt the space. And the company PopTalk is actually trying to do that, to come up with a model that helps people have only one phone and actually be able to call the cheapest to all different places. By the way, emerging markets and any industry where the government is involved are normally very prone to have high inefficiency. So if you're looking for a place to disrupt, look for places that are highly inefficient. So that was innovation. I want to go to the third topic of my talk today, building great company cultures. And I've been fortunate over the last few years to be a campus tour guide at the Google campus in Silicon Valley. And I have many, many companies coming from Europe especially. Oftentimes, the companies would send their HR executives to come and learn about Silicon Valley. And we would oftentimes talk about how much the work culture has changed, okay? I mean, you all know it. Any job opening is available to you today. Like the internet helps you find anything. If it's in a different country, you just pack your bags, you can move. If it requires skills that you don't have, what do? You go online, you take an online course, you learn those skills. So competition for talent has always been hard, because even now it's harder because people change their jobs so much. We really had a generation, like if you think of your, parents, maybe grandparents, they would choose one employer for life. Now we're changing employers all the time. And it's really hard. It's becoming harder because this generation of talents that is coming tomorrow, these are smart, creative people that really have different expectations. These are the smart, creative people like mostly you guys, that their alternative to joining your company is actually starting their own business. So when you think of these smart, creative people, which, by the way, they are defined, or the definition of them is the digital age descendants of yesterday's knowledge workers. So this is the new generation of young startup techie people. These people, when you want to get them, if you're a consulting company, it's not important if you make them an offer for your offer to be better than the other consulting company, but your offer needs to be better than their alternative, which is to go out there and start their own business and do whatever the heck they want, because they have absolute freedom to do whatever they want. They rent a co-working space, they hire some of their best friends to join, et cetera, et cetera. So that's very important. So the idea that the talent of tomorrow is coming, and most companies are still doing the way they create their company cultures and the way they hire talents hasn't really changed over the 10 years, is actually very frightening. It's very important to understand that if you're a bigger company, or even if you're a younger company, you need these smart, creative people for the future, and that to get these smart, creative people, it's not enough anymore to offer them high-paying jobs. You need to offer them an environment that they can shape, that they can be part of, that they can identify themselves with. So the idea of designing a work culture cannot be an afterthought anymore. Your work culture needs to be thoughtfully crafted. And I want to talk about some of the elements that I've seen that are important to thoughtfully craft such work culture. So the first point is trust. These young, smart, creative people appreciate trust. They're looking for work environments where they're respected, where they know that their ideas can best develop in an environment where they're met on eye level, where they're engaged and involved in the decision making. And how do you increase the trust? Well, you make them feel 100% part of your company. And you do that by increasing their sense of contribution and by increasing their sense of identification. Let me start with contribution. Remember what I said earlier. Their alternative to joining your company is doing their own company. So you need to give them some way, some venue, some possibilities to co-shape the environment that they're part of. That's very, very important. It's not just employee enters the job, does the work, but you need to give them ways and opportunities to shape that work environment. Second thing, the sense of identification. And don't think of like every employee needs to be like a C-level executive to identify themselves with the company. It really starts very, very small. Sometimes it's as simple as the way how you call your employees. At Google, I'm not a Google employee. I'm a Googler. At Amazon, they're Amazonians, you know? And just the name, just the way how we call ourselves really impacts the way how we feel about the company. We feel ownership in this company that we're part of, you know? And that's very important to create such feeling. But it's not, creating trust is not small things like how you call your employees or how they call themselves. It's also bigger. It's also about the way how you talk about your goals and your targets. It's about how you communicate the overarching objectives of the company, the journey that the company is on, and the metrics that you measure yourself against. And it's important to not just always boast of like success, but it's also important to be very humble in front of your employees and talk about things that are not going well. To measure yourself, and if you're not on track, to say that, to acknowledge failure, to admit if something is not going according to plan. And that really does create trust. Another idea around trust is you want your employees to collaborate. You want them to work together. You want them to be informed and knowledgeable. Well, in order to do that, you need to give them the information they need. And this really reminds me of a comic. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it to include it in my deck, but it reminds me of a comic which I saw, where the employees were sitting around a table trying to solve a puzzle. So they had all puzzle pieces on the table trying to solve it. And the manager was walking out the room saying, "Good luck solving the puzzle." And he was holding behind his back some of the puzzle pieces, you know? And that really reminded me of the importance of if you're leading a team, if you're leading a company, you need to be open. You need to share important information, even if sometimes that information is highly confidential. But if you really care about letting your employees feel part of the venture and feel ownership, you need to share these things. And it's a risk, right? Like, on the one hand, you're sharing confidential data. There's the risk of leaks. But on the other hand, you need to know that the more you make your employees feel part of the venture, the more that you give them this sense of ownership of the company, the less there is a risk for them to leak information, right? And it's a very fine balance, but it's very, very important to pursue this goal. Brings me to the next topic, giving your employees a voice. Reminds me of a company that I sold a Google solution to 5 years ago, 2010. And they were a gaming company, 200 people. And 5 years later, they're now over 1,000 people. And the CEO, whom I sold this solution to, he wrote me an email saying, our HR executive is coming to Silicon Valley. Would you mind meeting up with her? I said, no, of course, I can do that. Would love to learn more about how you guys grew from 200 to over 1,000. So we met up with that woman, with that HR executive. I met up with her at Google, and she asked me, how do you, I think I asked her, I said, like, how do you enable your employees, all employees, independent of level, title, responsibility, how do you enable them to actually have a voice in the company and share criticism and maybe say things that they don't like? And she was shaking her head. And I said, you guys don't do that? And she said, no. Our CEO doesn't want these type of conversations to happen in the company. And I said, really? You're running a company of over 1,000 employees, and you're afraid of asking the question of what's not going well? And she said, yeah, unfortunately, we have this kind of culture. And this is really a stark contrast to what I've experienced working specifically for Google, where imagine every year we have a survey. It's called Google Geist. It's not Zeitgeist, it's called Google Geist, where we really try to feel the pulse of the company. And every year, more than 90% of all people answer that survey. More than 90% of all employees. That is really a remarkable turnaround of a survey. And in that survey, it's not just about what's going well, what do you like, would you recommend Google, would you recommend your manager? It's also about what's not going well. You know, how much trust do you have in the leadership team? What are the things that you don't like? What are the things we need to improve on, you know? And it's very important to have this conversation with your employees and to give them this voice. Because it's like, if you ignore it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? It still exists. It's just very important to bubble it up. And it's very important not just to listen, but also to evaluate and take action. And especially to take action is something that most companies don't do. They learn about things that are not going well, and they don't take action on it. But the reason why we have more than 90% every year answering that survey is simply because the leadership takes action on it. If they didn't take action, people would feel disincentivized to sit down for 30 minutes and provide their opinion. So that's very important. Another way to give your employees a voice is ask them in every, like, let's say 6 to 12 months, ask them what is the most bureaucratic process we have in our company. Let people vote what the most bureaucratic processes are and what really needs to be improved on. And then make a list. And then assign owners to that list and really discuss it publicly. You know, that's another way to give your employees a voice. Also very important, also something that we do a lot at Google. And then eventually, one thing that I really love about the culture that I'm part of is the possibility to have a direct conversation with our CEO. So I'm just an employee, just like anyone else, 50,000 by now. But every week, we have a company meeting where our CEO, Larry Page, and the co-founder, Sergey Brin, they step in front of everyone and they answer questions. So first we have a topic that is being presented about, and then they answer questions. And there's a microphone. I can just walk up to the microphone and really say, hey, Larry, I have a question about X. And he's there answering that question. And it's really important to have that exchange, to give people a voice. And by the way, these events, they're called TGIFs. Thank God it's Friday. At Google, some people say it's called Thank Google It's Friday. I don't know, I think it's rather Thank God It's Friday, but not Thank Google. And but that's very important to have this kind of exchange and give your employees a voice, because oftentimes it's the youngest and freshest people that come to your company that have the best ideas, that haven't been around for too long, that don't know the limitations of what is possible and what is not. So it's really important to surface, to bubble up their opinions and tap into their opinions, right? Next point, workplaces. And creating a workplace that really drives collaboration and well-being. And that reminds me, again, of a story of when I went to Latin America the first time, and I was sitting down with a company that was one of our partners. I went to visit their offices, and it was a 2-bedroom apartment in a residential building. And you might think now, wow, that's very startup-y, right? very like scrappy, small place, everybody just working on their laptops. Well, that's true, but it wasn't startup-y at all. It was actually quite nasty, very small windows, very bad air, people really cramped. And I was talking to the CEO, and I said, your business is going well. You've been growing like over 100% from year to year. You're hiring so many people. You're gonna change your office anytime soon? And he said no. And he was talking about how much money he saves on rent and how great that is. And I was in shock because I really felt bad for the people. And that was such a contrast to kind of the work environments that I got to see and got to experience. For example, again, with the example of Google or Silicon Valley in general, if you take Google, the founders, they came from university. They literally moved from Stanford University to starting Google, so they didn't know any corporate environment. They just knew the university environment, study rooms, group settings, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of the workplace dynamics that they brought into the workplace. And just to give you a very simple example, the way how the workplace is designed in most Silicon Valley companies that I've seen is not about how can we increase the individual productivity of a person, but it's more about how can we make sure that new ideas get created. So, for example, if you think of the cafeterias that we have, we have not round tables where everyone can sit by themselves, but we have long tables where you have to sit with other people, and you almost have to have a conversation, and that really helps you, create new ideas. So that's about the workplace. And the funny thing is that people always ask me, you're doing that so that people stay around longer, right? You have a gym, you have laundry service, you have a barber that comes on site. You do that so people stay longer and work longer, right? And the answer is no, to be honest. It really is about helping people, feel comfortable at work and identify themselves with, the place, like feel comfortable and mostly look at it this way, like your employee that comes to work, he doesn't stop being a human being at 9 a.m. when he enters your workplace. He still has the things to do that he has to do. And it's important to facilitate that as opposed to fight that. So if the employee ends up staying longer and working longer, great, but it's a result, it's not the intention in the first place. Then there's a point about valuing the person behind the employee. I think I talked about it a little bit with the empathy-driven leadership that I experienced from my manager. But one thing also that I encourage you guys to do is, if you have employees, it's not just important to have weekly business meetings with them and catch up on the goals and targets, but also to have a separate conversation, which is kind of a personal development conversation, where you talk about things that are on their minds. So where you encourage your employees to maybe come to office and say, look, I'm happy in my team, and I'm happy doing sales, but actually I would really like to be in marketing. And I would like to position myself to be able to enter a marketing team in the future, and then have this conversation, because again, your employees have personal objectives as well that you need to consider somehow. So it's important to have this conversation and value the person behind the employee. Last one around company cultures. I want to mention this because it happened to me a few times, which is I get an offer from another company, and then I would write back. So let's say I do business development, and then I get this job opportunity, which is business development at this other company. And I write back, and I get a little sassy, and I ask them, why do you think I'm a good fit for this position? And they say, well, you have done business development before, and this is also business development, but our company offers this and this and this and this and this, so it's better, and we think it's great for you. And one thing that really frustrates me when I see that every time is that people assume that as a smart creative, I want to stay vertical. I want to become very specialized in the area that I'm in. But actually, the smart creative people that I got to know, they don't want to develop themselves vertically. They actually want to develop themselves horizontally. They want to learn a skill, learn it really well, and then move on to the next skill to not get stuck, and then move on to the next skill, and so on and so forth. And it's very important for you as a company to offer such horizontal moves and not just design vertical career paths, but also design horizontal career paths. And I'm saying this because it might not sound very logical to all of you, because if you take someone who doesn't have experience, if you allow them to do a horizontal move, you're almost taking a little bet on a person, right? Because he doesn't know the skills for that role, but he wants to learn them. But here's my point. If you have someone who really, really, really wants to learn something, it's so much more valuable than having an expert that is already an expert. I really dare to argue that way, because there's nothing beats the hunger that someone has to learn a new skill and really become good at it. And it's important to take these bets and facilitate these horizontal moves. And I'm saying this also knowing the following thing, which is, as a company, you have certain problems today, but in 3 to 5 years, you have different problems. So what do you want? Do you want a specialized person who will have a really, really hard time to solve the problems of 5 years, in 5 years' time? Or do you rather want to have someone who's a generalist, who can move horizontally, who can learn things very quickly, and who you can throw at the problems that you have in 5 years, right? So I truly believe that looking for these generalists, looking for these people who really have a huge hunger to go after these opportunities, after these skills, is much more important than having specialists. Unless you're building a self-driving car and you really need specialists in that area coming from the university research groups, then it's okay to have specialists. But I think as a general mindset. With that, I would like to show you my last slide, which is the slide about me and my websites. So if you want to learn more about me, you can go to omidscheybani.com. You can see a list of some of my projects that I'm doing. I have 2 blogs. One of them is called The Positude, and one is called Moonstorming. The Positude stands for positive attitude. It's all about thinking positively. Moonstorming is all about brainstorming for moonshot ideas, for big ideas. So we talk a lot about, we write a lot about thinking differently. And also, if you're on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, just look for my full name. You can follow, subscribe to my updates there. It would be great to stay in touch. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, we still have some time for a few questions, so you still have time. Just post them on Twitter with Ask Omid. Let's go to the sofa if you like.
Yes.
Okay.
This way. Okay.
Be my guest. Okay, so I have a question, because I really like this idea of working horizontally and changing careers horizontally. But I think that sometimes we face this problem. Just let's imagine a person wants to move from sales to marketing, and he finds this circle of, you don't have experience, so we cannot hire you, and since you don't have experience, you won't get hired. What would you recommend to this person?
Yeah, so so when it comes to applying for a job that maybe someone would look at you and say you're not a good fit, I really encourage people to become very creative and show the hunger that you have to learn a certain skill. So one thing that I once did for a job that I wanted is I applied and I interviewed for the role, and what I went to the interview with was a 90-day plan. I wasn't asked for it, but I went to the interview showing them this is what I would do the first 90 days. And also, I went there with an attitude of, not like, I'm a great candidate, hire me, but my attitude was more, how can I help you? What is your biggest problem, and how can I help you? And by combining this attitude with this idea of coming with a document to the interview where you show what you're willing to do the first 90 days, that really makes you a compelling candidate. And I think any good manager would probably look at you and say, well, this guy doesn't have the skills, but he certainly has the hunger to go out there and learn those skills. So, yeah.
Okay, as you remember, you can still participate in the IQ polls. You can either scan the QR code or just go to the link, okay? So, and I think we've all heard about how cool it is to work at Google, the environment. But do you think that kind of environment that promotes participation, is it suitable for all kinds of companies?
Honestly, yeah, I think these principles that I just talked about of giving employees a voice and trusting them and creating these collaborative environments, I sometimes like to believe that the way Google does it specifically is very extreme. Not extreme bad, but very extreme in terms of how developed it is. And it's hard to copy that from one day to the other. So if you're a different company and you want to get there, you cannot be Google tomorrow, whereas you're a different company today. So you need to take these steps one by one. You need to do that step by step. And it really comes down also to kind of the culture, the culture of the country, the culture of the company. So think of it like all elements of these principles are good, but you need to see which of these elements are good, specifically good for your company. So maybe having bureaucracy busters might not be a good idea, but having a weekly meeting might be a good idea. Or maybe having a meeting is a good idea, but you cannot do it weekly because people really actually need to work. It's a call center, for example. People need to be on the phones, so you do it maybe once a month. You know, there are different variations of doing some of these principles that I talked about.
So it's always possible to adjust. Okay, and what would be your advice for a person just fresh out of college who wants to maybe work in a very, I don't know, international job and travel the world? What would be your advice to that person?
So I think it's always great, if you're interested in an international job, it's always great to have shown that interest in advance. So before you go apply, you probably had the opportunity to study and do internships. So these are all opportunities to already go out there and gather international experience. I think sometimes you have job openings that specifically are designed to take you abroad and take you to international offices and what have you, projects. And we know like consulting tends to be that way because there are a lot of projects internationally, so you can obviously go there. But oftentimes also something that I saw is there are opportunities that you can create. So, for example, before I joined this Latin American team, we didn't have a Latin American team. But my manager back then, his name, a Spanish guy, Carlos, he looked at the market and he said, we should have a Latin American team. And he proved it to the management that if we open that team, this is how much revenue we can make. And he created a team. And now there are 20 people working on that team that didn't exist 4 years ago. So even inside a company, if you're really ambitious and you really show that there's potential, you can open up markets, especially if it's younger companies that are expanding. So especially with younger companies startups that get funding, I see opportunities coming up to go abroad and work internationally.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming, Omid.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and we still have a half an hour break, so please, thank you very much.